Good evening, everybody. James Hancock here, back to review the series finale of Sharp Objects. And before I say anything, unless you have seen the mid-credit scene at the end of the episode, do not listen any further. I was sitting there watching the credits in a slack-jawed state of awe, and sure enough, there's a hidden scene that has a massive impact on the show, and I do not want to spoil it for anybody, so go back, watch the show, watch that final scene, and come back because there's lots to talk about. But tonight we're going to be talking about the final episode of a show that's easily going to be one of the strongest contenders for the best show of the year, and that is, of course, Sharp Objects, based on the novel by Gillian Flynn. After I posted last week's video, I learned from one of the comments that I've been pronouncing her name incorrectly the entire season. It's Gillian Flynn, a hard G like Gil as opposed to Jillian, so for that I do apologize. But this final episode was written by Gillian Flynn, as well as by Marty Noxon, the creator of the show. And I should also say the episode just ended a couple minutes ago, so I've had zero time to digest or decompress, but my immediate gut reaction is that was one hell of a season finale, answered the majority of my questions, left me in this crazy acute state of anxiety and glee for most of the episode. Anxiety because I was absolutely terrified by what was happening to Camille Preaker, but I was also feeling this intense sense of glee because I was just in awe at the superb craftsmanship and just the superb storytelling of this extraordinary show. I don't think a show has ever made me stand up and sit down repeatedly as much as this show, especially these last two episodes. And I finally figured out the only way I could handle my anxiety as we were watching Camille Preaker waste away from poison is I would just shadow box and punch at the screen because I couldn't figure out what to do with all the anxiety that felt like energy coming out of my fingertips. And I think the reason my joy was so intense while watching the show was that it was compounded by the fact that Hollywood, in terms of movies, so rarely dives into really disturbing thrillers anymore. Back, I remember in the late 80s and the early 90s, Hollywood just cranked out sexually charged thrillers seemingly on a monthly basis, almost like they do superhero movies and shows these days. But this kind of story used to be Hollywood's bread and butter. But if you look at all the big releases over the course of the summer, they are all giant franchises that you can basically build a business around, whether that's Mission Impossible or The Incredibles or Avengers Infinity War. And I went to all of those and had a thoroughly good time, but I also craved the opportunity to see stories that take you emotionally places that are disturbing and dark and foreboding and terrifying and at times enticing. And in a strange way, this golden age of TV almost surpasses some of the great thrillers of the past because you have so many hours with which to flesh out these characters, and the characters in Sharp Objects were absolutely riveting. So suffice to say, I think they absolutely nailed the landing. I think the show actually got better as it went on. Initially, I described the show as a slow burn. The last few episodes did not feel like a slow burn whatsoever. The first ending of this episode, the way it cuts from the teeth to Amma saying, "Don't tell Mama," and then the Led Zeppelin music kicking in. I mean, that was like being at a rock concert. It was such a badass, horrifying, thrilling, exciting way to end the show. And then to have that mid-credit sequence as we see this terrifying montage of Amma committing one violent crime after another. This is some of the most savage shit I've seen in a very, very long time. So I think everybody involved with this show should take a much-deserved bow. The cast was extraordinary. The writing was absolutely first-rate. I should call attention to the fact that Jean-Marc Vallée, he directed every single episode, and I saw this great video earlier today where he was describing his directing style with this show, and it's really interesting because he doesn't use storyboards and he doesn't plan out a lot of shots in advance. He uses a lot of handheld cameras, and he really likes to react to whatever the actresses are doing in the scene. And one of his favorite tricks, and you really see it at play in this episode, is that he likes to observe whatever Amy Adams is observing. He likes to show her POV, and then he just cuts to a simple reaction shot. And it's a very simple style, but emotionally incredibly powerful because it places us in Camille Preaker's shoes and really allows us to experience a lot of the story firsthand. Whatever this director might be working on next, I will absolutely be there on day one. In any event, I feel like I'm kind of ranting and raving like a lunatic, and justifiably so because that episode was fantastic. But let's start from the beginning and work our way forward just so we can savor all the juicy morsels from this terrific finale. So first and foremost, what I loved about the way this episode unfolded is that it surprised me at every turn. And I guess going into this episode, I was expecting more of a stereotypical, almost predictable confrontation where Camille and Adora and Alan and Amma would have a knockdown, drag-out brawl at the dinner table and everything would be outed. And it absolutely did not take that route in any way, shape, or form. Camille sits down at perhaps what might be the most awkward dinner conversation ever caught on film. Alan basically commands her to do so. And they're having this very lighthearted conversation about the fact that in Missouri they still use the death penalty and they still use lethal injection. He's talking about where the poisons come from that are probably going to be used on John, assuming that he's found found to be guilty. You know, all the normal stuff that families talk about over the dinner table. And Amma is dolled up like Persephone, the wife of Hades from Greek mythology. When I was a kid, I was absolutely obsessed with Greek mythology. And the story of Persephone is a fascinating one. Basically, Hades, the god of the underworld, he rode up from hell and kidnapped her and took her back to Hades to be his wife against her will. And her mother, who was a goddess who had the power over all the seasons, I think it was Demeter was her name, she became so sad and forlorn that the entire world fell into a perpetual winter. Finally, Zeus implored her to bring back the summer, to bring back the green, and they came up with an arrangement where Persephone would spend half the year with her mother, half her year with Hades, which is why you have summer and winter. In any event, Amma's dolled up to appear like Persephone, who, according to Amma, is responsible for deciding the fate for a lot of the people who are sent to Hades after they die. And I was expecting something seriously violent to take place at this dinner because, as I mentioned before, the director's style, he had one great shot where Camille's looking at her mother, just absolutely staring daggers at her. And Amy Adams was just putting on a clinic when it came to her acting. And Patricia Clarkson just has this smug, nonplussed expression. But the camera kept looking at this knife that was on a plate of ham. And I was expecting at any second Amy Adams to reach down, grab the knife, stab her mom, run off with Amma off into the night. But that's why I'm not a filmmaker, because I would have chosen something very clumsy and stupid like that. What instead happens is Camille decides to basically sacrifice herself to try and save Amma. Initially, Camille suggests that now that things are so crazy around town, why doesn't Amma come back to St. Louis and stay with her big sister for a while? The parents are absolutely not for it, and Undora's immediate reaction to the threat of her little precious toy being taken away from her is she immediately starts mothering and smothering and quote-unquote caring for Amma, and you can tell she's about to take her upstairs and start poisoning her again. And Camille comes up with a brilliant scheme where she pretends to be sick, and immediately Adora is just like, shh, oh, this person desperately needs my help. This is the chance to feel needed. This is a chance for people to see me caring for her. And she has no choice but to follow that Munchausen's by proxy syndrome that she suffers from, drags Camille upstairs, strips her down, takes away her phone, and starts force-feeding her that poison by the spoonful. And initially, my suspicion was that Camille, with her very regular drinking habit, would just have guts of stone that'd be willing to withstand that poison. As it turns out, the opposite was the case. Amma actually has a very high tolerance because she's been drinking this crap for years. For Camille, it really lays her low. And as she kept drinking spoonful after spoonful, I was just screaming in my apartment, just going, what the fuck? What the fuck? Like, I couldn't believe the direction the episode was going. And I had a brief surge of hope when I saw Camille basically mounting like an escape plan where she tells Amma to run out the door, run out of town, find Willis, tell him what's going on, and never come back to the house. I was like, all right, she's seizing control of her destiny. Amma's going to rise to the challenge, and they're going to save the day. Of course, Amma totally chickens out, never leaves the house, just goes into her room and plays like a little girl. And Camille just keeps getting sicker and sicker and sicker. Willis makes a routine visit by the house, and we see Alan running a smokescreen for Adora, knowing perfectly well what she's up to. He turns the music up so there's no chance that Willa might hear Camille, even lies and says that Camille is out with one of her friends. But the strange thing is, we see two examples of Alan actually asserting himself a little bit in this episode. At one point he suggests to Adora, he says, look, just leave the girls alone. Let them rest, which is obviously what they need since neither of them are actually unwell. And Adora's just like, well, I'm just helping nature run its course, or whatever. She has some line to that effect. And Alan immediately crumbles and says, well, this is your department, and just leaves the matter alone. But there's another interesting detail where he goes into town to get his hair cut, and the chief is in there. And Alan lies and says that the girls are sick and that they've been passing around the house and that the chief should watch out because he might catch it as well. When the chief pretends not to know what he's talking about, Alan makes a snide comment about the fact that the chief spends a lot of time up there. And I'd heard a lot of theories over the last couple of weeks that perhaps the chief might turn out to be Camille's father, that perhaps the chief has been helping Adora cover up some of her crimes. If those theories are true in the book, I do not know because I've never read the book. But as it turns out, he's just a well-intentioned individual who's gotten a lot of things wrong, including his suspicion of John. He and Willis try really hard to break John, and John just absolutely will not give any ground and fights tooth and nail any accusation that he murdered his sister. But I can't describe to you what an enormous weight it felt like being lifted off of my chest when these blue lights started flashing on the ceiling. And Camille's getting sicker and sicker. She's slipping in and out of different visions about her sister. And suddenly we see these blue lights in the ceiling and we realize the cops have arrived. The good guys have arrived. And as it turns out, her crazed call to her boss trying to explain the situation totally worked out. The boss came to town. He explained the situation to Willis. And right at a moment where it looked like all was lost, suddenly the girls are receiving medical attention. Adora's being handcuffed. She's completely bewildered, completely confused, talking about her lawyers and her money and so on and so forth. Amma's wailing and sobbing like a maniac as her mother gets dragged away. But suddenly I realized everything's going to be okay. Like, both these girls are going to survive. Justice will prevail. But right at that moment, I happened to glance at the clock to see what time it was, and I saw it was only like 9:40. I was like, huh. there's a lot of time left in the episode. What might be coming? And I was really enjoying the aftermath, and Willis is explaining to Camille while she's recovering in the hospital that her mother had really cooked up this perfect poison consisting of like rat poison and antifreeze and a few other medications, and that they found a set of pliers in the home that matched the marks on the gums of all the murdered girls, and it basically looks like an open and shut case against Adora. We see that Alan is still at home, Adora's in Orange in prison. I just kept thinking, something's going to happen, something's coming, because there's just so much time left. And then we get set up for this nightmarish revelation. We see that Amma is adjusting to life in St. Louis, she's making friends, she's getting along with Camille's boss, that Camille's boss no longer feels the need to constantly check in on her and see how she's doing. She's actually looking after him, she's written this incredible post about her experiences. And then we started getting some strange warning signs. When they're all hanging out and having dinner, I noticed that Amma's friend had some writing on her hand. I couldn't quite make it out, but it made me think either this girl really looks up to Camille as a journalist and is copying her style of writing on herself, or perhaps this is something that Amma has been teaching her. And Amma starts saying some really strange things to Camille about how I just love you and I could just eat you up. It was just really creepy sounding stuff. And then we get word from the friend's mother that the girls are missing. They can't find them. They don't know what's going on. And Camille just assumes, oh, the girls must be fighting, no big deal. I'll give you a call once the girls turn up. She happens to go over to the trash can to throw something away, and she sees in the trash can a little prop, basically a little mattress from the big dollhouse from back home, the dollhouse which they brought to St. Louis. And as she goes in to replace the mattress in the bed where it belongs, we see from Camille's vantage point, once again, the camera work in the show is absolutely superb, because we see from her POV right through the window into the house, the bed, and we see this giant fucking tooth right under the bed. I was like, oh dear goodness. It's like whatever's coming next can't be good. She reaches in, she pulls out the tooth, she takes a good long hard look at it, and then she looks into the dollhouse and sees that the entire floor of the bedroom is made up of human teeth. I mean, that is some sick fucking shit. And as my jaw slowly started to drop and hang open as I was processing what that actually suggested and what that meant, she turns around, who's standing there in the doorway but Amma, and she just says, "Don't tell Mama." And boom, Led Zeppelin kicks in, and I was just floored. I mean, this is masterful storytelling. It's so incredibly satisfying when you see a well-written show just get better and better and better, and keeps tightening the vice and keeps twisting and keeps twisting and turning and subverting your expectations, and then somehow manages to stick the landing in the most surprising, unconventional, unpredictable way. It is just a rare treat to enjoy a show like this, and it's been an absolute blast covering it every step of the way on this channel and ranting and raving with all my fellow enthusiasts. As soon as I'm done posting this review, the first thing I'm going to do is go back and rewatch the ending of the episode to see if there are any details that I missed in that final montage in the middle of the credits. So once again, bravo to all involved. This was a superb show. At the end of the year, it'll definitely be in the mix as one of my favorite shows of the year. Right now, at this moment, granted, I'm still processing all my enthusiasm, but it's hard for me to think of a show that I've liked more. I mean, I really enjoyed the latest season of The Expanse. I really enjoyed the latest season of Westworld. I absolutely love Succession. But if someone put a gun in my head right now, or put pliers to my teeth and threatened to rip them out and said, "What's your favorite show of the year?" right now I'd have to say Sharp Objects all the way. But who knows? Fingers crossed, maybe something will come along this fall that tops it. That would be a wonderful, beautiful thing. In any case, I'm going to wrap this video up. I hope you enjoyed all my reactions and reviews over the course of the season. I've had an absolute blast. If you want to talk more about the show, the best place to hunt me down is always on Twitter, @Colbrax. And if you have any suggestions of cool stuff to cover this fall, definitely let me know. One of the big things on the horizon for me here in New York is the New York Film Festival. A bunch of the big art house films, basically like awards contenders, are going to be playing there. So I'm really excited about that. I don't really have a lot of shows this fall that I'm intensely fired up about covering. So if you want to lend me a helping hand on that front, definitely let me know. But thanks as always for watching my video. I really appreciate it. But more importantly, onwards and upwards.